Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Master Your Qualitative Data Analysis. My name is Rachel. I'm a senior research mentor, an analyst here at Statistics Solutions. I really handle all of the qualitative data, qualitative analyses here. So Statistics Solutions is a full service dissertation consulting company. So we're here for you at any stage of the dissertation writing process, whether you are still sort of developing or refining your topic all the way through your discussion chapter at the end and your final proposal or your final PowerPoint presentation defense if needed. So our contact information is here. You see on the first slide, and you'll see it pop up at other times during the presentation as well. But we do offer a free consult to get to know you a little bit better and your project and see how we can help out. So don't hesitate to get that scheduled. We will also be providing that information in the chat as well. So I have Icades with me, and she's going to help answer any questions that come in during the webinar that are more related to what we do at Statistics Solutions. And then at the end of the webinar, if there are questions that have come in related to qualitative data analysis, I'll handle those at the end. So if you do have questions about the webinar and that content, go ahead and put those into the question and answer box, and I will get to those at the end. Okay, so this is, again, Master Your Qualitative Data Analysis. My name is Rachel. I'm a senior qualitative research mentor here at Statistics Solutions. So the first thing that you should sort of generally be aware of is that qualitative data analysis, a lot of the different types of analyses are very similar. They'll get you to a similar place, a similar endpoint, even if the steps that get you there look a little bit different. Okay, so qualitative data analysis has all of them sort of share in common that they are inductive. Okay, we're not sort of starting with a priori assumptions necessarily. We're working our way into the data, allowing what is there to, sort of come out. It is simultaneous. We do data analysis. It kind of comes along with data collection. It happens at various stages while we're doing other things related to data collection as well. It's also iterative. Okay, so this process, sort of becomes more and more refined as we go along, and it's interpretive as well. So even if you're not doing, say, a phenomenological study that says it's interpretive, there is an element of interpretation associated with qualitative data analysis. Okay, so they really share, the different analyses really share these characteristics. So what I want to do is talk really briefly about a couple of qualitative research designs, really high level overview. I have a separate webinar on designs that you're welcome to sign up for if you're interested. I'm not going to cover these in depth here, just the most common that I see when working with clients. And then we'll move into some of the different types of data analysis. So most commonly, I see case studies, phenomenological studies, and the generic qualitative design. So case studies are really helpful when you are looking at one case or multiple cases that are bound by some factor that they all share in common that unites all of them. And the hallmark of the case study is really this drilling deep down into this case or potentially multiple cases, using different data collection techniques. So you really come at the case from all angles. And so you have data perhaps from interviews, from surveys, you might have observations, you might have documents. Okay, so different types of qualitative data. Phenomenological studies are really sort of rooted in philosophy, for one, but also in psychology, okay? Because phenomenology is used to really understand a person's lived experience of a phenomenon and the way that they make meaning of those experiences, of those phenomena. Okay, so in phenomenological studies, then across all participants, you're looking at, what is sort of the core, what is the essence of that phenomenon? What are the commonalities of the experience that all of your participants, or certainly the majority of your participants, share in common? Okay. Generic qualitative designs are really, really helpful when maybe your study doesn't align quite right with a case study or a phenomenological study. And so a generic study is really flexible. Okay. So, if your problem and your purpose and your research questions are, maybe you're interested in someone's experience, their perceptions of an experience, but you're not really interested in that sort of introspective, how they make meaning of that experience, then it's not really a phenomenological study. It might be better using a generic design. Okay, so you can combine different techniques in terms of data collection, in terms of data analysis. It's flexible in that regard. So you can sort of, I'm going to say, pick and choose from a buffet, if you will, of data collection techniques, analytic methods, but you're not just sort of grabbing out of thin air. It needs to make sense for your problem and your purpose and your research questions. So you still have to justify its use in the same way that you would a case study or a phenomenological study. But those are the three that I see most commonly used. So, like I said, the process of data analysis is really, pretty similar across all analytic techniques. Okay. Overall, you are looking as a qualitative researcher to take a great amount of qualitative data and boil those data down into patterns, categories, you might call them themes, sort of based on whatever analysis you're doing. Okay, so you're reducing all of your data down to find the patterns that exist across your participants. So qualitative data collection yields a lot of qualitative textual data. We can collect data using interviews, and there are different types of interviews. You can use a structured interview, you could use a semi-structured interview, you can use a very open-ended interview, depending, again, it depends on your own study and design, but different ways to do interviews. You might take field notes, which is, every day that you do an interview, that you do observations, you take extensive notes, right, about what you saw, what you heard, what you're thinking about it, making sure that you're really getting all of those ideas down. You might be doing a case study, in which case documents might be really helpful. Maybe you're looking at the impact of a new curriculum program in a high school. And so it would be really helpful to look at documents related to the curriculum. Okay, so that could be qualitative data. And then observations as well. Maybe you are observing a high school classroom and you have an observation protocol that you use to make sure that you are noting the same observations or the same types of observations across the classrooms that you're looking at. So the point is, there is a lot of variety here in terms of collecting data, and it will very likely yield a lot of data. So then you have to figure out what to do with those data. Okay. The first thing that you will do is transcribe the data. Once you have your interviews, they're probably audio recorded. And so you need to get them on paper for analysis. You can do this a couple of different ways. It's generally thought to be more beneficial if you yourself as the researcher transcribes your data. This isn't always feasible. However, if you're maybe not such a great typist, or you don't want to spend the time, sometimes it's easier to hire a transcriptionist, and that's totally fine as well. Okay, so you get the data transcribed, and you want to make sure that there is detail, right, of the descriptive information, the context for those data. So what time of day did the interview occur, and what was the setting, and who was the participant, and was it a focus group or was it an interview? You want all of that for context. And then if you're using good old-fashioned pen and paper, leave some space in the margin so that you can take notes on the transcript as well, because that's all really helpful for thinking. Okay, writing is thinking on paper. Making sure, and this is especially important in a focus group, that you can clearly distinguish between the speakers and who is saying what, right? Because the worst thing is to have a focus group with 5 people and you can't tell who's who. And so you don't know who to attribute quotes to, right? And that can make things kind of messy later on. So trying to be really, really clear about all of that as you go along will really help out later. You might think you'll remember later on down the road, but you probably won't. That's just how it works. And then also, it may or may not be important, but noting any of these incidental noises, right? In an interview, there is the what people say, but you also want to pay attention to how it's said, okay? Because that nonverbal communication can really tell us a lot. In fact, sometimes it speaks a little bit louder than what someone actually says. Okay, so that can be really important for context later on too. So just making note of those kinds of things. And there are different ways to organize your data. So, if you're really like old school, you can go with pen and paper. You could use filing folders. You can print everything out. You could use index cards. Okay. You can store everything digitally, on your computer, in the cloud. Just make sure that if you do this, of course, you have backups, right? You don't want to lose any files for any reason. So you sort of have your choice here of how to store the data. And one great thing about, and I'll talk about these more in a minute, about some qualitative analysis computer programs, is that they can help organize data really, really, really nicely. So that's one really big benefit. You can group data a couple of different ways. And, I should reiterate that all of this is also going to depend on your own study and your own design, what makes the most sense. So if you're doing a multiple case study and you have, say, 3 different high schools that you're looking at, it might make the most sense to start organizing your data based on those 3 high schools, right? But, it could be the case that you organize based on document type. So you have all of your interviews in one place and you have all of your observations in another place. Or you might have, every piece of data collected for one participant in one location. Okay, and group it by participant. Make sure that this seems very obvious, but make sure that you name the files in a way that makes it easy for you to retrieve them so that you remember what they are, and again, it's one of those that seems really obvious, but when we're sort of in the moment, I think it's very easy to think like, oh, I'll remember it later on. And chances are good that you may not, right? So make it easy for you, do it in a way that makes sense for you. Okay. And again, making sure that you are backing up your data. You don't want to lose this. You've worked so hard to collect data, right? Most of you have probably spent a long time collecting data. So you don't want to lose it. So physical copies, digital copies, making duplicates, triplicates, that can all be really, really important. And, just making sure that wherever you're storing these, you're doing it in such a way that if someone first, that no one else has access to those data, but that should there be a data breach, someone else wouldn't know whose data or whose. So we have data organized, we have it transcribed and organized. And the first step of any data analysis is you need to read your data, okay, just to get an overall general sense of what people are telling you in interviews, what you observed in classrooms, okay? Really immersing yourself in the data so you get a good sense of the whole before you even dive in with a data analysis program or with a pen and paper and highlighters. Okay, so this is a really important part. And this is why it can be very helpful to do the transcription yourself. Because if you're transcribing, you're already really working closely with the data in a way that you're not if someone else is transcribing for you. Okay, but again, like I said, there are certainly trade-offs, and sometimes it just makes sense to have somebody transcribe so that you're not 3 years down the road still trying to transcribe your interviews. That's a worthwhile trade-off. And as I've alluded to, there are different ways to analyze by hand or by software. Okay, so if you have maybe a smaller data set, if you really like working with hard copies of your data, analyzing data by hand might be the most sort of efficient and easiest. This can make a lot of sense. If you don't have to print out a ton of paper, a ton of interviews or anything like that, you definitely want to make sure that you have an original copy, right, of your data. But in this case, what we're doing is organizing data on paper itself. So you use the margins for taking notes, and you could even, you could do this with highlighters. You could start coding and cut the coded passages out and put them into different piles of similar codes. Okay, so you can absolutely analyze data by hand. The other thing that you can do is you can use qualitative data analysis software. I will say also, you can use something like Microsoft Word, which also functions as, I consider, also coding by hand, even though it is in a computer. It's not physical copies, but you're still the one going through and coding, highlighting, right? You're making those decisions. Okay. This is also similar to using qualitative data analysis software. And I think one of the misconceptions that I see the most is that there is a magic button that you press once you have all of your data uploaded that makes the software analyze for you. And it does not. Okay, I want to be very clear about that, because I've also seen it happen where, chairs and reviewers have been really unhappy with students who have used qualitative data analysis software because they say that it isn't analyzing data by hand. And that isn't technically true, right? The researcher is still making all of the same decisions about the coding and the organization process as they would be with a pen and paper and highlighters. Okay. But what the software can do, and there are so many different programs available now, they help organize. So when you code a segment of text, all of the programs are going to store that segment, that coded segment, in a unique location in the program. And so every passage of text that you code to the same code is stored together. So you can retrieve it really easily. If you, if you have a code, say, just call it leadership, okay, and you want to open the code for leadership in any of these programs, you'll click on it and it'll pull up every single chunk of text from all interviews that you've coded leadership. Okay, so the power is in the organization, and being able to organize like that helps to visualize these categories. Okay, so in vivo, Atlas TI, Hyper Research, Max QDA, Deduce, there are really, any number now, and they all fundamentally do the same thing. I get a lot of questions about, what's the difference? And I know that some schools require that you use a certain program. Other schools, it's less important. They fundamentally do the same thing. They all have their different quirks, of course, but the process to data analysis is going to be the same no matter which program you use. And so what I generally recommend for students is, if your school provides you a discount for one of these programs, go with that one. Just go with whichever one is sort of, makes sense. It's the least expensive, because they all will do the same thing. So you upload the data into the software, okay? And then in the program, you'll select the data or the text, and it could be a word, it could be a sentence, it could be a paragraph, and you assign it a code, okay? And then from there, like I said, it's going to organize every passage that's coded with that code. It's going to save it at the same spot, right? So that you can see it really easily. And then you can start moving codes around when you do further analysis and data reduction. So it just really streamlines all of that. And then, you don't have a lot of loose pages of paper with different colored highlights all over it. So coding is sort of the fundamental, let's say, second step, right? If the first step is this full immersion in the data, then we start the coding process. And this is what helps us make sense of the data. And we do the repeated readings, we make sure that we're immersed in the data, and then we start to segment the data. Okay. And like I said, it could be text, it could be images, if you're doing something more visual. And each segment, each fragment is labeled with this code, which is a short descriptive word or phrase that identifies and describes that passage of text. So it needs to be relatively short, but it also needs to be something that you will remember, that makes sense. Okay. And so you use these codes that you're identifying through the whole data analysis process so that you can refine. Okay. You can eliminate any redundant codes. Okay. So you refine them down, and then you start combining codes based on similarity to form broader themes or categories. So as an example, we can take this passage of text. So I really wasn't happy with the outcome. I almost started to cry when I found out. I had worked so hard to get a good grade in the class. I felt bad that all of my hard work was for nothing. I knew that this would have a big impact on my GPA. I had to get myself together before anyone from class saw me. I didn't want them asking why I was misty-eyed all of a sudden. Okay, so we have a general sense of, maybe what this research is about, or at least what this participant is talking about. So as we go through, and if we're looking at, emotion, Okay. If we're sort of, that's our idea, is looking at the underlying emotion behind this, then we might code, we see wasn't happy and we code this and we go with dark blue here. Okay. And then we read on a little bit more and we see started to cry. So there are two codes here, right? These two passages of text. One was wasn't happy, one was started to cry. Okay, so we've identified those. And then here we have in dark blue again, I felt bad. Okay, so that's really similar to wasn't happy. I felt bad, I wasn't happy. Okay, so we might apply the same code to that passage. And then we use misty-eyed. Well, that's really similar to this, crying, or this physical manifestation of feeling bad, not being happy. Okay, so we've got two codes here. So the dark blue, if we're going to assign this a short descriptive code, we might call it disappointment. Wasn't happy and I felt bad indicate some degree of disappointment here. And again, if we're looking at this sort of physical manifestation of disappointment, this person was tearful, right? Started to cry, misty-eyed, right? So these two codes are related to each other, and they're related because they both indicate sadness, this feeling of sadness. And so the theme then might be called sadness. So you have two codes that support the creation of the theme. So we work our way up from codes, we refine these into larger themes or categories. The term theme is applicable to different data analysis techniques, but you see it really commonly in thematic analysis, which I really like because I think it's very straightforward and very helpful if you're just kind of dipping your toes into the water of data analysis, which many are at the dissertation stage. And so again, we start with reading and reviewing all of the transcripts for the sense of the whole, and then you code the transcripts. Okay, so just similar to what we just talked about, going through identifying passages that are meaningful in the context of your research. Then, it says searching for themes. So, it's not so much that the themes are like hidden in there and you're just trying to find them. I mean, you're actively constructing, you're actively doing this data analysis. And so in the search for themes, you are sort of interrogating that code list that you've made in the second step, and you are looking at how those codes are related. So if we go back to the tearfulness and disappointment, what they share is this sadness, this communication of sadness. So that's how you start to build these themes up. So that's the search for themes. And then you want to make sure that the themes that you have created, that you have identified, are supported by the codes. So you want to read through all of the codes within that theme and make sure that they tell a cohesive story, make sure that nothing is out of place. And sometimes it's the case that you shuffle codes around a little bit because you realize that, oh, maybe this passage actually makes better sense in a different theme, right? And that's part of the process. Then you define and you title your themes, give them a descriptive title. What is the theme about? I see a lot of reviewers now really like sort of action oriented titles. So that's always kind of a good way to go here. And then presenting your findings, which is your results chapter. Okay. And so you'll see as I go over a couple of these different analyses, how and why they are so similar. But cyclical coding is another way to do this. And so again, after immersing yourself in your data, the first cycle of coding, you're going to go through and, just as you did in thematic analysis, identify those words, sentences, page of text that has to do with your research question, that tells you something meaningful. Okay. And you're going to code those, give them the short descriptive codes. And then in the second cycle, you basically make another pass through your data. Okay. And this is kind of, similar to this ensuring themes are supported by codes and searching for themes. It kind of combines all of this, where, you're making sure that everything fits together. So you may identify new codes. You may identify that, two codes really are essentially talking about the same thing. So you can eliminate one because it's redundant. And there are different types of codes that we can apply here. And while this comes from cyclical coding, the different types of codes certainly you can use in really any of the analytic methods. So descriptive coding is where you, as the researcher, assign a code. You decide what the title of that code is. In vivo coding is where you use the participants' language. Okay, so you use the words of the participants, and that is the name of the code. And then simultaneous coding is it's more where you're looking at patterns. So if we go back to this example of, a student who's had an exam grade returned, okay, who clearly wasn't happy about the outcome, it may be that other participants did really well and were really happy with the outcome. And so while there are two different emotions being expressed, the code might be for the pattern, which would be, reactions to exam grade, so that it doesn't matter if the reaction was poor, or if the person was upset, or if the person was happy with the grade. It's the actual just response in general. It's the pattern. So different ways to approach coding. These are not mutually exclusive either. You can absolutely use any sort of mix. That's perfectly fine. Sometimes, in vivo makes a lot of sense. Especially like if you're doing phenomenology, where you really are looking at sort of the psychological and you want to use the terms that participants use, this can make a lot of sense. But other times it just doesn't make sense, and you might use descriptive coding, and that's totally fine. So once you've done your first and your second cycle of coding, you start to categorize the codes. Okay, and this might involve some reshuffling, again, maybe recoding, maybe recategorizing, to make sure that the codes support the categories. And so in this case, we're using the term categories like we did the term theme in thematic analysis. Because what I want you to see is how similar all of this is. Okay, they're just called different things. And then there are other types of data analysis that adhere more to particular qualitative designs. And so I have two examples of this here: interpretative phenomenological analysis, which is really psychological in nature, and then Van Kam, also really psychological in nature. And so these are both used in phenomenological research. Interpretive phenomenological analysis is you're really doing the same steps, right? You've immersed yourself in the data, you've coded each transcript, but in IPA, you go one transcript at a time, and you code and you thematize one transcript at a time. And then once you've done all of the transcripts, once you have themes from all of the transcripts, then you bring them together and you look at how those themes are related, and you put them into superordinate themes. Okay, so it's just a different sequence of steps, really. And then I present Van Cam here. I don't see this very often. It looks like well, it is a lot of work and it looks like a lot of work. But what I do want you to see, and my reason in presenting this is that it's really just different words to describe the same process of data reduction from codes to categories or codes to themes. So in the first step, we do what's called horizontalization, and that is the preliminary coding. And so again, you read your data, okay, you code or extract those sections of text, you assume that all data are equally important. Okay, you don't throw anything out at this point. So you do the preliminary coding, then you again interrogate that list of codes and you ask two questions. Is this quote important to the participant's lived experience? And can this quote be reduced to its latent meaning or its essence? Okay. And if not, then you eliminate that quote. Okay. So you're reducing your data down to just the core. So you're left with these groups of quotes that have passed this test. Okay. And then those become the categories or the themes based on this shared meaning. So from there, then for each participant, and this is where it gets very, very time consuming, we'll say, from there, for each participant, you create a textual description. So using quotes from the participant and a structural description. So what they said and how they said it. And you do that for each participant. Okay. Then you create a composite across all of the participants. So a composite textural and structural. So again, two parts to this, right? You're taking out the what people said and then the how people said it, right? And then you bring them together in a synthesis. So you have the structural, textural all together and the big final sort of what does it all mean? Okay. But again, what I want you to see here is that it's still a coding process where you might be looking at slightly different sort of aspects of the interviews or of your data, but you're really still just moving and refining and reducing your data into these core groupings, these patterns that most, if not all of your participants share. So when it comes to representing your findings in your results chapter, there are different ways to do this. And the most common one that we see is in narrative format, certainly, just written like stories. Okay. You want to use samples, quotes, excerpts from your participants, right, that illustrate, you can't just say, here is a theme, here's what people talked about, and have your reader or your committee take your word for it. Okay, you want to illustrate using quotes. You might use tables, comparison tables to represent your findings. You might use figures or maps might make sense. If you have done observations, again, if we go back to our classroom example, just because it's easy and fresh in my mind, you might, include a map of the classrooms that you observed. Okay, that could be really helpful for context. Diagrams, demographic tables. There are a lot of different ways to represent your findings, to present your findings. And again, it's not a mutually exclusive list, right? You can combine any of this. It's just what makes sense for your study and your data. Okay, so different ways to do that. So again, I'm Rachel. I am a qualitative mentor at Statistics Solutions. We're a full service dissertation consulting company. So we are here to help at any stage of your research. We do qualitative, we do quantitative, we provide help for mixed methods projects, and we offer a complimentary consultation. Okay. And the purpose of that is to get to know you and your project a little bit better and determine the right fit for our services. So you can email, you can call, you can go to our website. There's more information about this in the chat for this webinar. And get yourself scheduled for that so we can figure out how we can best assist you. And again, we help at any stage. If it's refining your topic, if it is writing up your discussion chapter, at the very tail end of things, we're here to help you. Okay, so we'll move into questions now. It looks like I do have a couple. And if you do have questions, let's see. If you do have questions, go ahead and put those into the questions box and I will answer them live. I'll read the questions and answer them live and just take them as they come in. So I have a question about phase 2 of a qualitative study using focus groups and participatory research design, using content analysis to analyze collected data, using Krippendorf, who is, kind of one of the go-to people for go-to scholars, researchers for content analysis. Does that sound right to you? Without knowing sort of really specifically what you're looking at, yes, content analysis is another one that is absolutely appropriate in a lot of cases. The one thing I'll say about content analysis that makes it just a little bit different, though, is it can be a little bit more deductive in its approach. So whereas you saw with some of the other analytic methods that I went over, they're more kind of a working your way in and assuming that all data are important. Content analysis sometimes can be that you start out with some identified categories already and you do the coding based on those. Neither is right or wrong. Okay, both are helpful. It just depends on your study. The other thing about content analysis is that you can quantify the results. And so it can be helpful for that as well. So if that is what you are looking to do, then definitely. Okay, the next question is, with IPA, does one still concentrate on open, axial, and selective coding to make sense of the essential meanings? Open, axial, and selective categorizing is the terminology used in grounded theory. So it's not the terminology that you would use for an IPA. So for IPA, I would recommend Smith, Flowers, Johnson, any combination of those 3 scholars. They have all written together a lot, and they, using their articles, will get you the right terminology that you want to use. But the coding process is, it's not that it's done twice. You do each, you do the coding for each. So you starting with participant 1, we'll just say, do the coding for that, thematize that participant. So you've got your codes and your themes, and then you set it aside, blank slate, start with participant 2, and then you bring them together. So you're not going to code twice. It's just the bringing those larger categories or the themes together across your participants. Suggestions for phenomenology readings or common contributors to this research method. Yes, so Smith, Flowers, Johnson, I think Larkin are really good for IPA. Moustakis is more, I just don't see him used quite as much anymore. I see a lot of IPA. So Clark, Moustakis, those are all kind of some go-to people. What other questions can I help out with? Okay, so I have a question about Ricoeur's three-step data analysis for hermeneutic phenomenology. Do I have any thoughts about it? Um, I wouldn't be able to tell you the three steps of Ricoeur's at this point. It's not something I see with my clients. It's not something that I work with. Um, Usually for hermeneutic phenomenology, I see IPA at this point, because I mean, I think it's a little more contemporary. But you get the double hermeneutic with the IPA. So not just your participants, um, analysis, but your own as well. So there's like the double interpretation. Okay. Um, let's see. Is there a Van Cam book that lays out the process? Oh, this is one I would have to Google. I think that the Moustakis one does talk about it. Let me see if I can Google it really quickly. Yeah, I think just his phenomenological research methods talks about it, but you can also just Google Van Cam or modified Van Cam is what I've also seen in the past, that will talk you through it as well. I also know that we have on our blog at statisticsolutions.com, we have a blog that lays out the process as well. So that is available for you. Let's see here. Um, it looks like, okay, so yeah, sort of general confusion with so many references and phenomenological data analysis. Yeah, it's there are different ways to do it. Um, and because it is so rooted in philosophy, there are there are the hermeneutic approaches, so where you're actually interpreting what people are saying, and that's really the interpretative the IPA, the interpretative phenomenological analysis. But then there are others where the goal is not to interpret at all. It's really to find this core meaning, and there's no interpretation. So right there you have very different philosophical approaches. But again, most commonly I see IPA because certainly it is kind of a newer development, a newer technique. I think that in a lot of the disciplines that we would be using IPA, I think there is more of a general kind of movement toward recognizing that interpretation is okay. And researchers' thoughts are okay, like it's a very subjective view. But I also like Smith and colleagues because the guidelines are very easy to follow. So I think that you'll find that very, very helpful. And let me just type here. I'm going to put this into the chat. Smith, Flowers, and Larkin. If you Google any of those three, they have written, the three of them have written together. So you'll find papers by all three of them. You'll find papers with just one of them or just two of them, but they've really written a lot. They are the go-to interpretative phenomenological analysis people. And like I said, I like this one a lot because it's a straightforward analytic method, but it also provides this double hermeneutic analysis where it's how your participants make meaning and then how you as the researcher make meaning of your participants' experiences. Let me get a couple of these cleared out here. And We'll get to the next one. Okay, a question about using focus group interviews and using thematic analysis method to analyze collected data. Yeah, aside from interpretative phenomenological analysis, which again is, if you're doing an IPA study, it's sort of, it follows from design all the way through analysis. Thematic analysis is what I recommend most frequently to like everybody, because it is flexible. You can use it for phenomenology. You can use it for case studies. You could use it for ethnographic studies. It works really nicely to identify patterns. And so, yes, you can absolutely apply it to focus groups, interviews. Really, you could apply it to documents as well. And it's very, very straightforward. Its steps are very straightforward. It sounds like some of you are in here for a refresher. So yeah, that's good. It's nice to kind of keep these things fresh in our minds, I think. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining me this afternoon. It's afternoon where I am. I don't know if it's afternoon everywhere, where all of you are, but I hope that this was helpful. You will receive a copy of the presentation tomorrow, as well as the slides for this, so you can return to it as much as you need to. And we do have a whole host of other webinars that we provide here. We have quantitative webinars. We have webinars on your introduction chapter and your literature review chapter. We have, discussion chapter, all kinds of goodies on our website. So again, statisticsolutions.com, you can find all of that. Our blog, we have blog posts about just about every topic you can think of. So yeah, if you want to dive into that Van Cam, there's a blog post on that. And again, don't forget, we do a complimentary consult to talk about your dissertation needs. So you can get that scheduled either by calling us or emailing or following the link. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.